Okay, it says recording, but I didn't hear a message. Are we supposed to hear a message saying we're not recording?
I don't know, but it does have the recording up in the upper left-hand corner. So
yeah, it does. Yeah, I thought it typically announced. I apologize,
Your
my dog.
headset's quiet.
What was that? Oh, David joined.
Yeah, Kevin, your headset's really quiet.
it is.
I can hear him okay. It's a little bit soft, but not too bad.
Oh, it's through the telephone this time.
Okay.
Yeah, that's probably it. Losing some power on the transmit across the phone to the internet.
Wow, you got really good at hearing. You can hear that difference.
All right.
50 years, I guess.
Yeah, let's go ahead and get started here. I pasted the meeting notes, the live Hangout meeting minutes in the chat. So as usual, it's everyone's responsibility to kind of collaboratively take notes as we go along, and also add your kind of attendee your name to the list. Oops. In fact, if someone can add mine, that would be great. Going back to the meeting that we had on Tuesday, I think we had pretty much defined the subspec rules in terms of how we were going to deal with forwards and backwards compatibility within a release. So for anyone watching this video, the link will be in the chat, and it's the April 24th meeting minutes. Sorry, the notes will be in the download link. Yeah.
So there was some discussion out on the Google forums that maybe the subspec rules need to be revisited a little bit. I don't know. I haven't looked today. I don't know. Maybe people got them all resolved in their head. But Emily or Ken, I think Emily is the one that kind of posted some of the questions.
Yeah. I think it's So basically, is I'm trying to say the subspec like shouldn't need to worry about the Jakarta EE and Java EE and leave that to the umbrella spec. And we can when we deal with umbrella spec, and then we can revisit and delete some from these subspec rules.
Right. So one of my replies indicated that maybe those just need to be reworded to indicate that we are talking about a Java EE feature specification version, specific to like CDI or servlet or whatever, instead of the Java EE platform version.
Or just the APIs that MicroProfile uses from Jakarta EE.
Well,
but
I think it's specific to the subspec. If the subspec doesn't use anything in EE, because it does, which is the case for maybe metrics or something, then it obviously doesn't have a concern. So, not like the rules aren't valid. It's just they don't necessarily they're never going to come into play for that subspec.
Before we move forward, what are the minutes link? Can we share that? John?
It's in the chat.
It's already shared on the chat.
Oh, sorry,
Twice.
I joined late. I joined late. I missed it. I'm being waited for work. Sorry, guys.
Are you trying to look for your code T-shirt?
Not today. Seriously, this is the second time I changed today. Believe it. It's not a day like today. No. Today, no. I will be serious. Amelia, go ahead.
Well, can you rephrase what you're thinking about again, Emily? I mean, so you're saying that the subspec should not be tied to the Java EE version?
Yes.
But it seems like that's a choice that the subspec can make by not using features from Java EE.
No, what I'm saying is this: we shouldn't. We should protect subspec from considering this complex infrastructure issues, and then leave this to the umbrella spec. If this subspec end up in that umbrella spec will have a final say. So for in this reason, like a sub-spec don't even need to worry about these dependencies. Only need to worry about its own API SPIs.
Right.
Like
But
it's
what if
converting clearly.
what if your API uses part of Java EE critically?
It's fine if it uses uses Java EE. Any APIs and etc. It will be in the dependencies. And then if you use, for example, for config, if you decided to use the specific CDI 2.0 stuff APIs, and that should go to the MicroProfile 2.0 branch, should not end up in the MicroProfile 1.x branch. So that will tie in.
We haven't solved that yet. So that was what today was going to be about. But in terms of the subspec rules, are you trying to advocate that the subspec should have no ability to control what version of CDI that they use?
No, I'm just trying to advocate the substract version should not be affected by like which version of the the dependencies, Jakarta EE spec dependencies.
Well,
So you're saying that you would be able to use CDI 2.0. So let's say the current version of config is 1.1 and it uses CDI 1x, right? Like 1.2. Yeah. And then you want to start using CDI 2.0 and you want to call that config 1.2.
Yes.
You think that,
no.
Yeah.
You think that that's valid?
Yeah, it is valid.
I don't agree.
I didn't do it.
No.
I think we had a whole hour meeting about this, and I don't think now is the time for us to go backwards on that all.
No, like JAX-RS, for example, it has like shaped from the EE7 to EE8, just have like the mana version change.
Well,
Emily, are we understanding you correctly? Because it seems that we are miscommunicating. Let's go back. Explain what you want, because why are we wasting the time talking about something we agreed last week?
No, I just I wasn't even like last week we discussed this, and then I had a second thought, and then I think wait a minute, and this substract rules is kind of too fine-grained, and some like rules should be left to the umbrella spec to worry about, and subspec should only worry about his own business and not the Java and Jakarta EE dependencies.
I think that depends on if it's an optional dependency on a higher version or required dependency on a higher version. If you say config 1.1 works with whatever JAX-RS greater than 3.0, then it doesn't really matter if it goes to EE8, 9, or 10. But if you say it requires whatever async features of JAX-RS 3.1 or 3.2, then the situation is different, and then I think the subspec should indeed bump the major version to indicate that it is no longer compatible with the old previous ones.
No, yeah, what I'm saying is it shouldn't be carried that way. It should be carried like this like a config 1.4 end up in the same bucket as CDI 2.0 and not in any other bucket. So in this way, like the same bucket, all the spec will work with each other. There's no mix match.
Yeah,
and
Emily,
wait. Bump is only linked with whether there's itself as any backward incompatible changes, such as I deleted a method or I deleted a whole class and etc. from that spec. I think this is what Java EE's policy.
Yeah, but Emily, just wait. I think we're still combining the subspecs with the umbrella spec, and all that we're talking about is just a subspec. So if config does something that requires a new version of CDI that takes you up to CDI 2.0, for example, That's a breaking change if you now require CDI 2.0.
Yeah.
Just forget about the umbrella spec and Java EE and all that, but just the subspec. And that's all that we're trying to talk about here.
Yeah, I agree. So that is a change, but I don't think that will make that spec to bump its middle version though.
And why not?
It's because I can control in a different way, and I want to use. I would like to make sure the subscriber completely comply with the OSGI semantic versioning.
When you say you can achieve it in a different way, how are you communicating to users? Like, if I'm using, fantastic, awesome config implementation foo on my CDI 1.2 application, and I see config went from version 1.2 to 1.3, and I go, gosh darn it, I can't wait to get my hands on that. And I put it on my app, and nothing works anymore.
Yeah,
how did you prepare me as a user to know it was never going to work?
So it's basically in this like jar, it has dependencies. It has it has imported packages and etc. And also like in the release note, you will say this will depend on the CDI 2.0. Another way is because we don't just release this individual stuff on its own. That would be end up in a MicroProfile like a 2.x. So that's
we do, though.
That's not correct.
We do release every subspec is released on its own, and there's nothing stopping an implementer from creating a version that supports that, and then it being available for people to pick up outside an umbrella release.
Correct.
Yeah, that's one of the bullets we have.
Fine. That's fine if it's easy. Upgrade from 1.3 to like 1.4, and obviously they will have look at their dependencies, right? It's not like automatically think, okay, this is
But that's the issue. If you're talking about a minor release number point release change, people are going to assume that it's going to work. They're not even going to look at dependencies. They're just going to try it.
Correct.
Well, okay, think the other way. From E7 to E8, how many specs bump the major version from the
MicroProfile is not only built on Java EE. This is what makes MicroProfile extremely likable to be used. We are
not exactly. So we need to build a model. We can cater for the experienced users, like who are comfortable with Java EE.
No.
And then I feel like if we use the semantic versioning plus with this, I mean, the umbrella version control and etc. I think we can achieve the exact same thing.
No, we are going to add, this just reminds me of going back to the votes of Jitsa, when down, like so much stuff. We're making it, if we go with the way you want, we're going to make any users use another project instead of MicroProfile. We need to be lighter and move forward as we have done in the past.
Right. I think one of my concerns is that if we're going to take that approach, we're basically replicating what Java EE does today, and that's what people were trying to get away from in using MicroProfile. And I feel like if we're doing that, then we're not offering anything new.
Correct.
No, I'm not. No. Let me finish. I'm not camping like not offering any new as a goal. I'm camping as offering something. I mean, easier to be controlled and easier to be understood. And I can like we can talk about umbrella spec rules, and then we can, and then after the umbrella spec rules, and then we can revisit to see are they like trying to do the same thing between the sub spec and umbrella spec, and then we can further like thin up these rules. I think probably won't be able to settle this. I mean, at this moment of time, I will just keep quiet. Let's continue the discussion about umbrella specs.
Well, this is where the debate occurs. And I'm not sure everyone else, but when the majority of the group agrees on something, we just move forward because we do understand, but we do not agree. So it's not about deviating from it. It's like we have taken your points and we have made other points to explain why. Can we move forward to everyone else? Can we move forward and be okay to be, have you been heard enough? And do you understand why we're moving forward? Because that is what these calls do.
So I did want to raise something on the subspec topic because it sounds like that the fault tolerance specification has the desire to add a feature where they're outputting metrics so people can understand why the fault tolerance cut the circuit, how long circuits are staying open, and basically give some visibility to the users on why the library is behaving like it is and so on. And so they're proposing to have buckets specific to the fault tolerance, each method that has a fault tolerant behavior. They're proposing to have a bucket on there that's output into metrics, and then of course they want to use the metrics 2.0 message format, which means that they would become dependent on metrics 2.0. And so the question opens, what happens to their major version?
And why is that? Why are they choosing to link? And that is like an embargo to me. It sounds like an embargo waiting to happen, a freaking mess.
No, hold on. Our job is not to stop people from being creative. It's just simply to communicate it clearly to the outside world.
Right. So David, you're just explaining, okay, here's another scenario that we haven't talked about explicitly about the sub-spec rules.
I believe we could imply it, but you're right. It's not been explicitly discussed.
Right, right.
Yeah, it's just the other worry I have is I just thinking ahead, how many releases and etc. I know I talked about release trains. If we do this kind of constantly do this kind of dependency, increase the major version, and then very soon, I will release the fault tolerance 4.0, fault tolerance 5.0.
I think that would be. What's wrong with that, right? Why is?
What's wrong with it is once we do a major version bump, that immediately tell external world actually this is not backward compatible.
Well, it doesn't mean that it's not backwards compatible. It means there could be breaking changes. It doesn't mean there is breaking changes.
Right.
I mean, again, we said at the start that at least the sub-specs are allowed to break compatibility at any point in time. To be able
we did. However, we also said that we should be very careful with it.
Yeah, and of course, and bump the major version and all that. But on the other hand, I think this is one of the strengths of the MicroProfile project, that we can allow ourselves to make these changes from user feedback when we see, okay, what we have designed does not work in reality, only in our pet labs, but not in reality, that we can then go in and just change it to match reality and to be better for everyone, and to do that at a quick pace. I think the big issue that we have been facing, where this whole discussion comes from, is that we are afraid to say, okay, if a sub-spec bumps a major, that in the next subsequent umbrella it would also bump the major, and then we would have major version bumps every now so often, which is bad for marketing.
Yeah.
And but from the technical side, I think it would be the right thing.
Heiko, when you say afraid, give an example. Why am I referring with afraid? Every single time I hear afraid, what do you mean?
I mean that what was talked last time about, that you can't really make release buzz about releases when they come too often. Vendors may not support them, or maybe too hard for them, in all these things.
Yeah, but again, we're jumping to the umbrella spec discussion again, and we were still on one from the sub-spec that we were trying to clarify.
Yeah, no,
I just feel like this meeting's just going all over the place, and we aren't being directed as to how to get this done.
I see a direct link here, because if we would not care about bumping the umbrella spec major relatively often, then we'll also not be afraid of bumping the sub-spec versions relatively often, because it really would not harm to just bump the umbrella version as well. I think this is trickling down. This being afraid of bumping the major of the umbrella is trickling now down into the sub-specs where it shouldn't.
Well, I think we have to start at the sub-spec, because that's the most concrete area with most realistic problems that we need to solve. They're not the secondary specifications. They are the primary things, and the umbrella only exists to serve them.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
So,
I think so I suggest, like, we can continue discuss the umbrella spec, and then we just sit back and to see, okay, I have this scenario. Does this rule work? And then we can revisit the rule and make sure, cover most of the scenarios.
Let's just close the gap on the one that I said. So is that you, John, typing that?
Yeah, I thought you had brought something new up, and I was taking the notes in the prior bullet.
So the new question is, if subspec A depends on subspec B. Well, specifically, if metrics goes to 2.0 and fault tolerance wants to use a metrics 2.0 feature, is that a breaking change for fault tolerance?
Right. I say yes.
I say yes as well.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it would have to be, because subspec 2 could also require a major a breaking change.
Does that depend on how it's expressed? Is it a breaking change? If it says in the presence of metrics, then do this, would that be a breaking change?
No, I would think. Well, I don't know. So I think that what we're discussing is, you're saying as a specification, my minimum requirement is X, not I'm compatible with X.
Right.
If you're saying I'm compatible with X plus 1 or X,
so I think that
you're all right? Mm-hmm. But if you're saying I am no longer compatible with X, I'm only now compatible with X plus 1.
That's a depends.
Yeah, then we can just add, John, let's add a line.
Let Alistair finish his sentence.
So I was just going to say, so I think I agree, if subspec A requires a break of subspec B with a breaking change, then it would need to bump its version. But I think that a subspec A could write its specification in such a way that it can work with either, and that should also be fine and not require a major update.
I would agree that would be okay, right?
The other thing is
capable of working with both of them, then you're a happy camper and you love everybody. And if someone's using a newer version, they might get a couple other things, but someone who is using this thing can still deploy on their current platform, still use the things that they're already using, and if they will still work, you haven't made a breaking change.
Guys, I need to hang out. I love seeing you all. For this, we need to add in here, and this specific line, we're using the I can't even speak. Transitional mathematical part. Just make it automatic. You guys, bye. I'm in a hurry.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
For this one, I would say if a subscribe A, mandatorily has a mandatory dependency on subscribe B, at the minimum, like what I can say, I would want to say subscribe B is kind of the minimum version of subscribe B from 1.0 to 2.0, and then this will be a break change. So the dependency has to be mandatory. Also, the minimum requirement B jumped from 1.0 to 2.0.
But isn't that what we were talking about Tuesday, and that was in the notes? It may not explicitly say minimum, and maybe that's something we need to change. But we've always said it was a case of basically removing compatibility from an older version and adding it to a newer one. That's what was causing the major bump.
Right.
Right.
And I really hope we haven't spent half an hour arguing that minor point.
Yeah, I think we can agree on that, right? And if we don't agree on that, then we end up like on the EE side of fence, where we have, 10 years of JAX-RS and it's barely at version 2.0. And it's switched Java versions like 3 times. And it's just really hard. I mean, basically the version numbers are meaningless. Like EJB's version number between 3.0 and 3.1, I mean, they added new bean types. They added so many things that switched Java versions on it. That should have been a 4.0. I mean, it's okay. But yeah, I'll just stop.
So the one that's highlighted in yellow, David, if you can, I think this is what you were saying. I don't know who was typing there, but I think that's accurate.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. If you use a feature from another specification, and that feature is only available in the new specification, and you priorly didn't require that version, you required a previous version. So basically, to not use abstractions at all, your fault tolerance, you've released 1.0, you now want to add a major feature like exposing all of your data using metrics 2.0 stats. Well, you've just now put a major, and you're incapable of working without metrics 2.0, to Alistair's point. You're incapable of working without metrics 2.0, even in the functionality you previously released. Then you've just made a breaking change.
Yep.
Metrics, then fault tolerance now is incapable of having an existence outside of metrics 2.0. Okay, well now you got to upgrade. The only thing that a user could understand is that you change your version. Reflect that you've added a major feature, and 2, to reflect that major feature relies on another major specification.
So that's like as I said before, that's only applied to the mandatory dependencies. If I can, make sure they will not have these mandatory dependencies.
And it's not just that mandatory dependency; it's that you used a feature from that, right? So if fault tolerance like leverages metrics, and they use a feature that existed in metrics 1.0. and metrics goes to 2.0, but fault tolerance isn't leveraging anything from 2.0, that doesn't necessarily mean that metrics is now incompatible with metrics, that fault tolerance is incompatible with metrics 1.0. They could still say our minimum metrics specification version is 1.
Yeah,
and
this is like okay, if fault tolerance can capable with or multiple versions of the the matrix, and also the other thing is that like if the matrix is not there, fault tolerance can continue to work without any problem. So basically, it should not be like this is back to say saying it's mandatory dependency, and also the minimum spec version.
I have a question.
Sure.
In the third bullet that is in yellow on the screen. So if you want to apply that change to subspec A 1.0, then you would have to, it would become A 2.0, right? For if you want to do that.
If you're requiring a major release of the spec you're depending on. So if spec B goes from 1.0 to 2.0,
right,
then you're going to require that. And there's breaking changes there, then you're going to have to go from 1.0 to 2.0. That's not necessarily, Now the interesting thing is, if spec B goes from 1.0 to 2.0, major change, but all it does is it adds features and deprecates nothing. That's still compatible.
Right.
Well,
this is interesting, John. If like a matrix goes to 1.0 to 2.0, it's just because of Java version. And then, like my fault tolerance, I am able to capable working with whatever Java versions already.
Right. So you, as that specification, would not change your language, saying your minimum Java version has changed. So therefore, there's no work, and no one downstream of you is affected.
But the thing is that if I have a mandatory dependency on B, and then B now is saying, okay, I cannot work with for instance Java 8. I go to work with Java 9. And for A is saying, okay, I'm able to work with Java 8 and 9 already. Like even B says, okay,
let's pause that and really stop on that one, because you made a point, and I think if B upgrades their Java version from 8 to 11, let's just make a really big scary jump. But subspec A, even though it uses B, is using no new features from that B Java 11 only, then subspec A does not need to increase or change their minimum version of B. They can keep the language the same, saying we're capable of working with B 1.0 or B 2.0, doesn't matter, but our minimum, we decide as a subspec, our minimum version of B is 1. That's our minimum version.
So
so there's no breaking change.
Yeah, I'm going to ask the converse question then. Let's config's a good example because a lot of other specs may rely on config, right? If I have a spec that says I require a minimum version of config 1.0, then config 2.0 breaks a change. Do all the other specs that depend on it then have to update their specs and say we only support 1.0? So it's a converse argument.
Well, yeah, so in that situation, it would be that they do not support config 2.0 unless they change their APIs to update.
Which means they would have to update their spec. They could no longer say a minimum of.
I would say if the other spec is saying I'm able to work anything like config 1.0 plus, and then the other spec doesn't need to update any version.
Maybe specifications shouldn't say minimum versions. Maybe they should be saying a version range. If we're semantically versioned, they can do that.
Yeah.
There's ways to express. We don't necessarily know the range. For the
but you can state that you'll work with 1 to 2. What you can't know is whether you'll work on 2, and at such time as you test and validate that your spec can support 1 and 2, you can increase the range to 1 to 3.
Yeah.
But I think saying minimum is risky.
You can't go back and re-release your 1.x that's in the past to update the metadata saying, actually, nothing happened and we still can work with 3 and 4 and 5.
No, I think it's the new release. The new release
No. That's my point. That's awkward to have to go and re-release all the old versions to say that they're still compatible.
But at the moment, if like that will be a version range. If at the moment like they just do like 1.0 plus, that would be a minimum is 1.0. So
right, but that's not what
the,
Alistair was saying. He was saying to preemptively put the top range in there.
That's what you would do with semantic versioning, because a 2.0 is a breaking change. You can't know if you're going to work with it. I mean, the converse is that as soon as a breaking change goes in, we have to go and rev the specifications that don't work with it, including ones which have already been released, which don't work with the 2.0 spec.
The thing is, this is back to the other thing is Alastair. If like config just bumped to 2.0 just because the minimum Java version change, actually my other spec for fault tolerance is perfectly okay to work with the config 2.0 because my fault tolerance can work with any Java version like Java 8 or Java 9, and then it's like now it's like it go to bump up its version. Yeah, it's really.
I gotta say that I'm not very attracted to this proposal in the sense that I imagine this in today's world, like someone wrote an application and they wrote it on Java EE5 and they go to upgrade to Java EE7, but for semantic versions only, it's simply labeled as not compliant. That feels really, really weird. Weird.
Well, no. I mean, the way EE handles this, correct me if I'm wrong. I could be wrong on this. Right? Is that the umbrella spec defines the set of things that are required to work together?
Yeah.
What I'm wondering, are there examples off the top of my head? Sorry, I can't think of anything off the top of my head where an individual spec within Java EE says, I rely on this version of this spec over here that's also an EE. I'm wondering if there's some experience that we can leverage here.
I think it's for the EE, like E8, within the E8, they will work together. And also within the EE7, they will work together. The spec doesn't say, oh, this one from EE7 work with this one from EE8. So the thing that I'm trying to campaign for is like we have this umbrella spec. We say, okay, the things internally, if they all end up in the same bucket, they will work together. Otherwise, they don't.
Well, so this whole topic of semantic versioning and putting the top range in now really boils down to, do we want to assume non-compliance or assume compliance by default? That's really what it boils down to.
Right.
Well, I'm not sure I quite follow the compliance. I think compatibility.
Okay. Let me update the word, but the Boolean logic is there. Do we want to, by default, assume that future versions will be incompatible or compatible? It's really what it boils.
And I'm assuming, again, it's about breaking, where there's been a breaking change. We can't know, right? If it was a non-breaking change, then it would be safe.
Well, we will. So given no information about the future, do we want to assume breaking change, that there will be a breaking change or that there won't be a breaking change?
If you're semantically versioning and you assume there's no breaking change, then there wouldn't be a version. I'm sorry, I guess I'm not understanding the question. So
the question is, do you put a top range in there now or not? We've been discussing at minimum. So our semantic versioning or our versioning has been discussing specifications being released with language that says at minimum this version. And if in the future we discover that a breaking change happened, only then would we take action to say, actually not this version.
So there's difference between kind of API and behavior level as well, because I think if I can imagine that you might have a breaking change to an API or a behavior change in an API, but wouldn't actually affect any callers of the API in any of the specifications. But if you were to change, say, the config API that all the other specs are using, so they could no longer run or compile, then it would be dangerous to have an open-ended, because there's no way of guaranteeing that.
We cannot, it would be, unless we guarantee backward compatibility across MicroProfile future releases, there's no way we can say at a minimum, right, this is compatible with, 1.0 or whatever, because we're not guaranteeing backward compatibility from a future release to the backward release.
Right. But it boils down to you can't predict the future, so you're going to assume that we're going to be. It really boils down to, like, let's just go. This is called statistics. More frequently, are we going to be backwards incompatible, or are we more frequently going to be backwards compatible?
Right.
Yeah.
I would say more frequently we will be backward compatible.
That would be my understanding as well. And there are other reasons for updating the version other than backwards incompatibility. Just to simply, this is a major new bit of functionality, and we want to communicate that.
Right, but that comes down to, are you versioning semantically or are you versioning marketingly?
No.
Yes.
Yeah, because if you're versioning semantically and you add a major new function, you don't increase the major version. You only increase the major version if you'll break consumers. As soon as you say, "Oh, I'm using it to indicate that I've got major new function," then you're versioning on non-semantic basis.
Oh, I see. Artificial major changes.
So yeah, so this is like is a boiled down, like in the subspec. Do we want to use a semantic version and done with it? And then it's like we can clearly show if it is a major version jump, does that mean the not backward compatible? If it's a minor version jump, is backward compatible. And then if we do too many rules, and very difficult to know whether it's backward compatible or not.
So let me understand this semantic versioning. So you're saying then that to go from 2.0 to 3.0, it would only happen when we are changing the semantics of it, or like upgrading an underlying API, like a CDI or something.
Yeah, no, this
breaking changes. I think is what I
breaking
understand.
Changes, like for example, a delete class, a delete method, or update method signature. So the consumer cannot compile anymore. Okay. So I will directly break the consumer.
Well, I guess once again, that gets back to the whole. If you start taking advantage of CDI2, is that a backwards breaking change or not? Even if the API or something hasn't changed.
Right.
Right.
I think also you usually version the programming model artifacts rather than necessarily grouping stuff. So in Java, what would be kind of semantically versioned would be the package rather than necessarily the entire spec. So for example, you could have a non-breaking change to the annotations and a breaking change to the config source package.
I apologize here. I'm going to step in real quick and just say 10 minutes to go. Time check.
Yeah, I think this versioning we need to think really carefully, and we need to get it right.
Well, yeah. So I'm reading through the semantic versioning document, and yeah, they definitely do say, as Alistair is pointing out, the only time you upgrade the major version is with an incompatible change.
Yeah.
And I mean,
yeah.
any go ahead.
So we may stay 2.0.
I was just going to say, so Java EE is not a good example.
Right.
That's semantic versioning.
Yeah.
Well, actually, it is, because every major Java thing has changed the Java language version and is no longer compatible with its prior requirements.
Oh, I meant
I wouldn't.
the individual specs.
Right,
Oh,
so
yeah,
servlet
well-
3.0 is backward compatible with 2.6, but not semantically.
I'm going to make a request. David, can you paste what you're looking at in the chat so we can get it in notes, just so we're all looking at the same semantic versioning doc? I think we're going to have a little bit of homework to do based on our time. Thanks.
Yeah. If we follow semantic versioning strictly, for the subspecs at least, it basically means that we're no longer able to release major versions for marketing purposes.
Right, of the subspec.
But
the subspec.
But the thing is,
different choice for the umbrella.
We could, and I'm throwing this out there as other options. We could semantically version on the package level, but not the spec. And we could allow the individual specs to be this gets kind of crazy, and I know it blows people's mind, but the spec doesn't have to be semantically versioned. We could choose to do it at the package level, which is what OSGI.
But also
you muted yourself a little too early on that one, but I get the gist of it. I think that would blow my mind, but not in a good way.
I think I would like to add a little bit more about this. I think in the OSGI semantic version also is like advocating the package level. However, it did have a rule on the bundle version. Like, okay, if you have a major bump on any of the package version, your bundle version will have to be a major version has to be bumped.
Yeah, but that's because of other aspects of the way OSGI works. That's not something I think has to apply to us and specs.
Yeah, so I'll just be honest in my gut reaction that this versioning, that versioning at the Java package level is probably taking a good idea too far to where it becomes a bad idea.
Why has it become a bad idea? I think it's a good idea.
If I had to deal with the fact that config had 4 versions inside of it, and it was up to me to sort all that stuff out, I would go to Spring.
No, it's basically as a user, you don't need to worry about it.
Yeah,
but as a vendor, I don't want to have to worry about that either.
Yeah.
No, if you are not in the OSGI environment, probably you don't need.
It's too detailed. No one cares that much, right?
Yeah, well, in that case, the subspecs are irrelevant. It's the umbrella spec that's the important one.
Now
because
you're going the opposite direction just because you can't get fine grain on each little toothpick gets a version, right?
No. I'm just saying if your response is making all of this work together is too complicated, then the thing you're going to be interested in is the umbrella specification, because that's the equivalent to what Spring provide.
No, I don't think that's the case. In fact, they don't really have an umbrella, more or less. They have a lot of little floating stuff, but inside each little jar, there's not versions or anything like that. Just because we're shooting down package level versioning does not mean that we all unanimously agree that versioning the subspecs is irrelevant.
So I think I'm still advocating maybe we should discuss umbrella spec versioning rules, and then we can revisit subspec rules, and then maybe if they duplicate and remove some, and then we can discuss the case. What if I have this scenario and what will happen? And then we revisit. I think we haven't made much progress.
Well, yeah, I guess, can I just ask a question? I'm no expert on semantic versioning, but if we use semantic versioning for the subspecs, and if a subspec decided that instead of having a minimum of CDI1.x, they wanted to rely on some CDI2.x feature, wouldn't that result in a major version bump?
Yes. By the way, we've played out. That's not a long answer. The answer is
no. If this is back,
Emily, I appreciate that you have an alternate perspective, but by the rules we've written out, not your perspective, not my perspective, not Kevin's perspective, but by the rules we've written out, that is a major breaking change. We're allowed to have individual perspectives, but what we wrote down, by the perspective of what we wrote down, that is a major change.
By that rule, but that rule may not be accurate.
We have to at least discuss in reference to what we've written down, right? We want to change what we write down. That's a different thing. But by what we've written down, that would be a breaking change, and therefore the version number would go up.
I've highlighted the bullet, I think, that covers what David's talking about.
And I guess I was also asking, just from pure like semantic versioning semantics, would bumping that CDI from 1 to 2 be considered enough of a change to warrant a major, or semantic versioning would say it's only a minor?
So it's difficult to say what semantic versioning would say, and the reason it was difficult to say is because CDI is not semantically versioned.
All right. So if we depend on non-semantically versioned APIs,
if the things we're using aren't semantically versioned, doesn't that mean the subspecs can't be semantically versioned, and we just choose how we want them to be versioned?
I kind of okay. Let me just try to see. According to the OSGI semantic versioning policy, it doesn't consider the dependencies. It's purely version is kind of its own API SPIs.
Well, then that would make me not want to use it, because I don't want to revisit all these rules.
I would agree as well. I feel like you need to take into account the dependencies, because you can clearly make something incompatible by changing the dependencies that are part of a subspec.
So that can be done differently. Will be done as we said, in the umbrella spec, or indicate in the bundle version.
No, that wouldn't be the way that I would go with this personally. I would want to see what the subspecs are actually doing amongst themselves, and only based upon that information decide if we needed an umbrella spec version change, and what that would be. But we haven't gotten to that part of the discussion yet. But it really comes down to, do you want the umbrella spec to lead the version, or do you want the subspecs to lead the version? I would favor on the subspecs.
I would kind of favor on the umbrella from the perspective that I think what users care about is, and I am using this very lightly, it's the platform, right? If you look at the Spring Boot case you brought up, people care about what version of Spring Boot they're using, more so than they care about the version of all of the individual Spring components underneath it.
Yeah, but you also look at it as Spring Boot only cares about the servlet spec and maybe the JPA spec, but not the whole platform. Right? People do pick and choose.
There's like Spring Cloud, there's a whole bunch of Spring stuff that's outside Spring Boot that is versioned completely separately to Spring Boot. So there isn't one entire umbrella for the entirety of the Spring Boot ecosystem.
Well,
I'm going to call. I apologize.
There's all the.
Go ahead and finish your thought, Kevin.
Well, just Spring Boot could be bringing in multiple versions of Spring Persistence, Spring Reactive. I mean, they've got a lot of other utilities that are brought in. And so I think that's what Alistair is getting at, that you don't care what those versions are. You're just bringing in, I don't know what the versions are, Spring Boot 2.1, and you don't care what all the minor utility versions are.
Right, that's the point I was making.
Right, and I don't disagree with that. I think the only way that users are afforded that luxury of only caring about the major version is if the people who decide the major version are caring about smaller things and taking into consideration how they interact together. If they do that work, then the rest of the world doesn't care about the smaller versions. It's not that nobody cares about the smaller versions. It's that there are specific people who work out all the details, and they decide whether or not there should be a major version change, and that communicates their consideration of the greater picture.
Yeah, and my point is that if we leave it to the sub-spec basis, as opposed to having it considered at the umbrella/platform level, then we could easily end up with the child specifications taking completely different viewpoints on what the versions should be, and we get something that isn't a cohesive platform. And I think
that's why we started with laying down rules of all the subspecs, so that way we could know as the people who are going to have to make the decision on what the major platform version should be, we know that we have put rules in place that allow us to know clearly, based upon the version numbers, what's going on in that spec.
Right, but they can't act independently because the specification, if you've got version 3 of MicroProfile, for example, and you can't compose config and fault tolerance and REST client because they're choosing incompatible versions of Jakarta E specs, that's the problem. That's why I'm saying I don't think it can simply be a case of each of the child specifications can, make their own decision, which is, I thought, what you were saying.
No. What I'm saying is I'm saying that when we decide the major version, we would take into account what's actually going on in the sub-specifications. It wouldn't,
Okay, that I agree with. I just think that we need some other guidance, and this is, which might be, that's what the architecture board idea is for, around when those prereqs get updated to ensure consistency.
And I apologize. We're past the top of the hour. We can allocate more time. I just want people to know that we're past the top of the hour, and if we should allocate another 10 or 15 minutes.
Let me check my calendar. Yeah, I'm free.
Okay.
I am too.
Alrighty, we'll keep going.
So what I was saying is that if we can get rules in place for the subspecs, so that when we as we'll call it the electoral college, or I have no idea what you want to call it, but we use that information. We put strict rules in place. So the subspecs have to version themselves by this document. So when we see all the major versions update, and like we have, 8 subspecs in MicroProfile, and 3 of them have updated their major version, do we want to say, you guys do your own thing, and we're going to keep at this version, and those 3 specs are not strictly included?
Well,
and we're not going to update the MicroProfile version, or do we make the decision, there's a lot of new here, we're going to include these 3 things, and we're going to update the MicroProfile major version?
Well, I think no matter what, there has to be coordination, because we can't have different specs that want to be included require different versions of a dependent subspec, right? So you can't have,
the versions all have to work out. Like when we release a MicroProfile umbrella version, maybe we can start on requirements on what we would agree on in terms of releasing MicroProfile umbrella versions. Can we start that section? Just so we can feel we got somewhere in this meeting and did just.
I think it's fair.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay, so here's one of the things that I think we can all agree on, right? We can all agree that when we release a MicroProfile umbrella version, all the subspec versions interoperate.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And I think the umbrella spec will be used more than individual specs by the customers.
Well,
because it will handle all the.
But that depends really on the vendor and the set of customers we're talking about. I don't know that that's a given.
Yeah.
Yeah, it won't be given, but it will make sure that the versions inside the umbrella spec are compatible. So you don't need to worry.
Okay, so yeah. So if you're using that as a reason why we need that first item, then I would agree.
Mm.
I'm not sure whether it will be a rule for umbrella or a guidance or something else, but I'm wondering if to facilitate the whole alignment of dependencies between subspecs, whether like at the beginning of a quarter that there's meant to be an umbrella release that MicroProfile says these are the base versions of things we're looking to target for this release, so that the subspecs know if they target anything newer than that, then they can't include themselves in that release, and it's going to have to be a one later than that. Rather than doing it last minute, oh, this is going to be based on X and Y, and subspecs say, well, I don't work with X or Y.
I agree with the need. I just don't know if that's a rule versus just a planning exercise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I mean, so the thing that I think is negative about, like, one of a negative thing about the Java EE side of the world is that telling different specifications, don't even bother with Java 8. You can't use lambdas in your functionality this version. That's just not on the table, and it really holds back progress because language versions come out now more frequently than and if that's where the energy is, if that's where everyone's excitement is, they should just dig straight into putting lambdas and all that stuff in their specification and not worry about the umbrella specification. That would be my preference, right? Just in terms of ecosystem. So I would almost want that organic movement to happen, and then based upon what actually happened, we take a look at some healthy point where it's not the last minute. I agree with not the last minute, but at some healthy point we go, okay, what did our subspecs do? And can we tie this all together? What would be our new minimum X, Y, A, B, and C? And
I think I'd be okay with that approach, so long as that the amount of time was sufficient for any subspecs that hadn't taken advantage of those things had time to update if things needed to change because the minimum was changing as opposed to just supporting more.
Right. And I think this comes down to a communication issue, which I think was ultimately the point of your comment, was really about communication.
Right,
So
yeah.
It should be like maybe the kind of the case where we have it penciled, or I don't know how to say it, but it should never be perceived as a rule. If a specification like let's just say metrics wanted to go and start digging into Java 9 blah blah blah, and they're like full into it, and they're like, we're Java 9, we see some amazing vision stuff on Java 9, and that might make all the other specifications go, maybe we want to start looking into that. That's on the table. I don't know. It's really about communication there. I think it's not.
Yeah, that's why I wasn't really sure it was a rule, but definitely I think some kind of communication and a level of planning around it, so that we are not either leaving out specs that have taken the next leap forward or leaving out ones that didn't take the leap and are still a bit behind.
I tried to take a note on that encapsulates Ken's point. I don't know if it's the best worded, but I think it's an important note.
Right. Could we do something simple in the sense that, for like the MicroProfile.io website, the project specs, there's a little project descriptor in there that says just information about the project. Could we put like your targeted version of like the Java version, or maybe we just use the PALM files or something like that? That way we could just maybe do a little bit of reporting on where everybody is, and just, so it's about visibility, right? This is really a visibility problem. If none of the other specifications can see that another specification is leaning towards a new version of CDI or a new Java version or whatever, then they can't make their choices accordingly. And
yeah, I think that.
Sorry, Kevin, go ahead.
Well, that's some of that. release planning mechanism that's built into the Eclipse page. I mean, I know that I've had people ping me because, hey, this, is this accurate? Is this out of date? So they're looking at it to find out what are the next versions of the component specs or the umbrella spec and what's going to be included, and approximately when. Now, maybe it's not as visible as what you're asking for, David, because it's on the Eclipse pages and not on microprofile.io, but
it doesn't matter where it is. I just think, yeah. Anyway, yeah.
I agree that needs to be communicated. It's just finding the right place that it isn't going to get forgotten about or ignored.
Yeah, and in some regards, the stuff on the Eclipse pages gets ignored.
I would say that whatever we're doing here should be communicated to users as well. So that would be, if there was some way we could get it, even as a mandatory README entry. You know what I mean? That would be maybe not so bad.
Well, I was going to say one other approach, and I know it's not ideal or it might be a bit messy, but I know like at the moment we have the table at the top of the minutes with like links to like the minutes for each of the specs. Maybe that needs to be turned into more of a table where some of the subs dependencies like CDI and JAX-RS can be listed so they can actually put the versions that they're targeting in there. So because the minutes is something we look at every 2 weeks at least with the Hangouts.
I would be fine with that. I mean, it would allow us to do it manually for a while, and when we discover what's useful to us and how we're updating it, I think would.
Well, or even having a link to the prospective release, the next release that's being planned for each of the components.
Right.
Yeah, something.
Yeah.
Basically, start getting the information that we're talking about in this table, I think is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, if only as a way to provide some level of status in the Hangouts every 2 weeks, that it's all there and we know what the status is, and it makes that planning of deciding whether we're going to bump stuff easier because it's to hand and it's not something we have to dig up.
I would fully agree. At least getting it in this table is a good start. I'm sure that once we start doing this, that table is going to get huge, and then we'll probably want to manage it somewhere else. But but I know from experience, if you over-engineer it, it never gets used.
Yep.
So let's just resolve that we're going to update this table to at least specify what version the different specifications are targeting. And if there's anything relevant in there, like they want to take advantage of, basically any breaking change type of things, let's just make sure that's in this table. Next version and what the break.
It almost sounds like we need a program call for MicroProfile that is dedicated to these things.
Well, I like having calls by exception rather than rule.
Yeah.
We have a lot of calls by rule on the Jakarta side, and I don't mind getting together twice a week on MicroProfile if it's required, and there's actually something very meaty to talk about. But I think if we just had it on the calendar and we all just showed up, the value of the meeting would drain out pretty quickly. We might even start.
In every MP Hangout, there is a part of it where all the sub-projects talk about their statuses, right?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you can have a questionnaire of 3 questions, that will be asked every week or every 2 weeks, I'm sorry.
Sure.
Are you introducing breaking changes next release? And all kind of like a checklist.
Sure, I think it's a fair question. I mean, basically, whatever we're going to put in that table, they should be prepared to speak to those points.
Right.
Yep. Yeah. I'll do that at the next live hangout and remind me if I don't. in fact, in the next live hangout, we'll kind of do a review of what we've covered, not every bullet, but for people to go off and review the bullets and to update the table with the data that we just talked about.
Let me put this finger in the wind out there. On the umbrella specification, like maybe we can just get a couple points on there more.
Okay.
If there is simply one specification that is another major version, would it be safe to say our position might lean towards not updating the major version and excluding that specification?
So there's a minimum criteria for the number of major sub-spec updates?
We don't even need to put a hard number on that. We just need to say which way do we lean.
So, well, I would say that if a version of the umbrella spec includes a child spec who makes a breaking version change, it would need a breaking version change.
Right,
but it could vote to exclude and use an older version of the spec.
Let's rephrase it this way. The umbrella specification is capable of excluding a sub-spec version at will.
I'd agree with that. Or you are replacing it with a already existing version, like an older version or something.
Right, exactly. Basically, I just want to say that we need to have done on paper, it's okay for the umbrella specification to decide to stay at a specific version of a sub-spec and does not have to upgrade.
Okay, yes, because the thing I was going to ask was, does that mean you could have a MicroProfile version that doesn't include a spec that previously was? And I think the answer with the way you specify it there is no.
Right. Yeah, I wouldn't advise that, but basically,
yep.
We could make the choice to stay at a specific version of a subspec. Does anybody disagree with that statement?
I don't know how anyone could disagree with it. I mean,
I guess the goal is that we don't want to end up with like 20, MicroProfile release 20 within a year, or is that the goal of that? The philosophy behind that?
Not necessarily. I think it's more a case of, as we were talking about before, if you've got specs that are like paving the path forward and doing really new stuff. If you've only got one spec that's doing that, the umbrella doesn't want to bump everything and force all the other sub-specs to come in and start using what this one single spec has chosen to go with. It's better off to say, well, we're going to use an older version of them and then we'll update everyone else for the next umbrella.
Yep. And that goes hand in hand with that first bullet there, because they all have to interoperate.
Right. I would say that, John, you're right in the notes. I think it needs to be spelled out explicitly the case that the umbrella specification may decide to include an older version of a sub-specification.
I wouldn't say older. I would say remain current or something. Older. What's the right word? Yeah. Well,
I think we need to specifically paint the scenario that a specification decided to go and do a major upgrade, and we are choosing to not take that major upgrade. And I don't think that saying we have choice of the versions really covers that. I think it leaves it open to interpretation, and the question would still realistically come up.
Why don't you say it may decide to postpone the inclusion of a new sub-spec?
I find this is clearer.
Yeah, and instead of include, I would say remain at an older version.
That's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Yes, to remain at. I like that better. That's the word I was looking for.
That's more positive.
And now I would say sub-spec version.
Yes.
In any umbrella release.
Yes.
There you go. Yeah.
Okay, everyone agree on this?
That hits.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I'm tripping over the last part. What do you mean in any umbrella release?
Well, a major or a minor is what I was thinking.
No, I think I'm just, I don't know, I'm just tripping over that phrase. What are we trying to indicate? So
the umbrella, when we do a major MicroProfile umbrella version and say it's finished, we get to decide to remain at a specific subspec version, right? So if we want to do, if we want to do MicroProfile 1.5, I'll just make up a number, and we do not want to take metrics 2.0, we are not required to take metrics 2.0. We previously released metrics 1.6. I'm making up version numbers now, and we're going to stay at MicroProfile 1. We're going to stay at metrics 1.6.
See, I guess my take is, why don't we just have a period at the end of older subspec version period? I don't understand what the rest of this sentence is trying to get at.
Yeah,
fair.
I think that's fair. I was struggling with that too there.
That's fine.
Yeah, also, I mean, the other thing should be that if we bump the umbrella to 2.0 and metrics is also bumping to 2.0 at that point, then it should be included, even if it's the only one that's bumping to 2.0.
Well, that's the umbrella specs to decide, right? That's kind of what the bullet means.
Yeah, and on to that point, saying that it should be included, I think, is one of those subjective words, because if it is a breaking change and other specifications rely on the prior version, right?
Yes.
It doesn't necessarily make a cut and dry that we can include that new metrics version, right? It's basically like, let's paint the scenario that there are 5 specifications that rely on metrics 1.x, and metrics 2.0 goes, we want in the door, and all the other 5 go, if you do that, we're all screwed. We obviously can't include the 2.0 because we're basically, we wouldn't be in a position to be great compatible.
Yeah, of course.
Right. So
of course, and on the other hand, but I think we probably don't need to write it down as a rule. We also want to make sure that the whole platform is evolving and not everyone's just saying, no, I stay on matrix 1.5 and I just torpedo what they're developing by not following.
Right. And I think that's where we have to paint scenarios that are very specific and say, well, which way we would try to lean in that scenario. So the first scenario is there's one new specification and there are no negative effects of including it, the subspecs that are near it. We would probably lean towards including it.
Yes.
If we're going to do a major version and there's a new major version of a subspec and it has no negative impacts on other subspecs, we would clearly lean towards including that. I think that's realistic.
Yep.
Now, let's go to the other angle. There is one subspec that is lagging behind, and every other subspec wants to include the major one, this new subspec, but that old subspec just can't get up to date. It refuses to go from metrics 1.0 to metrics 2.0 because they think metrics 2.0 is a total failure and they're going to stay on metrics 1.0. Well, we have a complicated scenario to deal with. I'm not sure that there are any rules we could write that would make that easier. Because
so in that,
yeah, go ahead.
In that case, where everyone else wants to move up, that sounds like a case where we would discuss whether or not we can exclude a child specification from a future version. And are we okay with doing that?
Right, and I think that maybe that is one of those things that we have to have written down, which is the umbrella spec does have the ability to potentially exclude a subspecification under extenuating circumstances or something like that. I mean, on the umbrella stuff, it's going to be difficult to get to very concrete rules. It's because we're going to have a lot of scenarios thrown at us.
Yeah. No, but Alistair is right. We should at least foresee that possibility. Like I'm making it up. Open API is losing interest. No one takes care about it. We move on with other stuff, and it just becomes incompatible because no one cares about it anymore. Then we should also be able to deprecate and remove it at some point in time.
Yeah, maybe there's a new standard that replaces it, and we want to invest in that instead, for example.
Yeah.
I think we should be able to remove specifications. I don't think we should take that decision lightly, but I think if we do, it should bump the major version.
I would agree.
Yep.
Okay, so okay, so
down.
Yeah.
To review the specification, and that will be considered a breaking change, which does require major version.
Keep saying subspec. Sorry.
Yep.
It's very suspect why you're saying.
Yeah, exactly.
And you do it every time.
I know. I can't stop, man. Also, I put the one above, the bullet above, as the next discussion point. So that's not final.
Okay.
Also, do we allow a sub-spec major number to be higher than the umbrella at any point in time?
Of course.
Yes.
Okay.
We've already covered that we allow them to release ahead of the umbrella specs. So they could be on version 6 by the time we get around to even considering a MicroProfile 3. We don't know how fast they go. We're not going to tell them to slow down. So, and requires a major version. Hey, John. Yeah.
Yep, I see it. And requires a major umbrella. I'll clean this up.
So, can I make a fairly big jump ahead and just make the statement that it sounds like we are favoring updating the MicroProfile major version on breaking changes?
Isn't that what this one says?
But
oh, removing.
Yeah, I think it depends on how we define breaking changes then.
Well, I think we did, right? So basically, if a subspec introduces a breaking change, and we would need to include, and we desire to include that subspec in the MicroProfile release, we would need to communicate that with our own major version update.
See, now that's where we get into the condition where we increase or we could possibly increase the major version of the MicroProfile releases way too often.
Which would be the case if we always decided to include the major versions in each release, but if we let some go for a while, if it was a minority, like maybe we didn't want to include metrics 2.0 until there's another specification out there, then we would decide not to include, we could devise ways where we could say,
okay, let's use a very real specific example. So
yeah,
we've been talking about MicroProfile 2.0, and that would include the updates to JAX-RS CDI, JSON-P, and add JSON-B. Okay.
B.
So that would provide the new base to MicroProfile 2.0. But none of the components would be updating yet because nobody's taking advantage of those changes yet. It's just to update the base. But now along comes, let's say our favorite metrics, and metrics says, hey, I want to take advantage of new stuff in CDI 2.0. So now they come along and they've got a breaking change. Can they come in at MicroProfile 2.1, or do we have to increase that to MicroProfile 3?
So I would say, so in that scenario, that's a little bit, if you said metrics, which one, what was the example you used?
Yeah, I used metrics, but it could be anything.
Yeah. So the first thing of the umbrella specification moving the minimum requirements for everything up, dropping support for the prior version when no subspec actually is driving that change, that feels off.
Well, but we wanted to bring in JSON B. And we did indicate before that if we brought in new ones, that would be a breaking change.
No, we actually wrote, well, for the rules for the subspec are, if the subspec brings in something that is at the Java EE version that is currently being required by a MicroProfile, it isn't a breaking change.
That's currently provided, right.
That's currently provided by the EE level we're at. But a subspec wanting to use JSON-D, that would be a breaking change for that subspec. And if we wanted to include that subspec in a MicroProfile release, umbrella release, and then the question on the table is, would we need a major version upgrade? I guess we lean towards yes, but I would only want to make a major version upgrade based upon subspecs actually using these things, not just to do it.
Okay.
It's actually a good point. The REST API, the REST client, they wanted to make use of some of the new JSON P and B stuff. So when we bump to Java EE8 APIs, having the REST client also directly use that and being released at the new version could be good in two ways. So that it emphasizes the message, like, look, we're taking, we're using this new stuff. We are, sorry, I'm lacking the English word. And on the other hand, also preventing these two bumps in short succession for first the platform and then for the REST client using this new platform.
So this sounds like a communication thing, which I think went back to Ken's point, which is the sub-specifications, if they're holding themselves back because they feel that the umbrella specification isn't at a certain version, that's probably not where we want to be as an ecosystem. We probably want them to be leading these upgrades rather than the umbrella leading the upgrades. I mean, I don't want to say rather than. I just want to. What I mean to communicate is that the umbrella should stay honest to what the sub specifications are actually needing from us. So if none of them are using these features, there is no point in us releasing the umbrella specification ahead of them, only to be faced with the question of what do we do when they actually take advantage of them.
Right, and I think that was one of my concerns around this, was that if we released, based on our, previous to the last couple of meetings thinking, we released MicroProfile 2 to base things on E8 instead of 7, and then if a subspec starts taking advantage of those and ends up with a breaking change in their API, suddenly we've gone from 2.0 to 3.0 in one fell swoop without really much change.
Now that's where Kevin's scenario was interesting, because let's just say that we did upgrade the Java version from, let's say, Java 8 to Java 9. I'm just putting on a scenario that's concrete and easy to understand, right? So we decide there are no subspecs that take advantage of Java 9, but we're deciding to upgrade MicroProfile umbrella from Java 8 to Java 9, and therefore we're going to cut a MicroProfile 2.0 release. If a specification then follows suit in a subsequent version, their breaking change lines up with our breaking change. We don't need to make a MicroProfile 3 umbrella specification. I mean, pragmatically speaking. Now,
unless in addition to updating E8 to 9, they're breaking APIs in another way.
Then that's when we have the need to once again make the consideration: do we include them or not? If we do, are we put immediately back in the situation where we need to do an umbrella specification upgrade? And then that would come down to pragmatism. If there's just one specification that has made a breaking change, which is not one that we have already made in the umbrella, maybe we don't include them for a while.
Right. And I certainly agree with that. I think in terms of concrete for MicroProfile 2, I'm wondering whether, because this is probably a change to the way things have worked so far, whether we actually need to announce to all the subspecs that they are more than welcome to start using Java 8 features in a major bump version of their specs, so that it can be included in a 2.0 of MicroProfile if we were to bump to 8, rather than 2.0 just being a pure bump of the base E features that we're taking advantage of.
So could we not say that if for example the umbrella spec ups the prereq for that umbrella spec, then if one of the subspecs also but later bumps it, the umbrella spec wouldn't have to increase its major version.
Yeah, that's what we're just communicating, right? With the Java 8 to Java 9 example, right? So if we wanted to say that the umbrella specification is going to decide in advance of any subspec using the new minimum, well, we're going to decide that the minimum upgrades from Java EE8 or Java EE7 to Java EE8, and that's the change we make. MicroProfile specifications who make backwards incompatible changes that have already been made at the umbrella level, they are fine to be included in 2.1 and 2.2 and 2.3 and 2.4 and 2.5. But if they make a backwards incompatible change outside of that, now we're back in the situation where they can't be included.
Right.
And that's
it. Okay. Yeah. So then I can live with that. We're kind of, maybe I was overloading the term with the breaking change, because if all that they're doing, if the subspecs or components, if they're just updating in order to be consistent or take advantage of the new stuff that's coming in Java EE8, then they wouldn't up their version, would they? I mean,
they would.
They go to.
They would update their version.
But would they update their major version?
Yes, I think they would
update their major version. So if there's anybody using these specifications outside of the umbrella, they are communicated clearly that it's not going to work.
Right. Which is why I'm thinking if we need to make some kind of announcement around that, so that if, for example, REST client is looking to take advantage of some EE8 features that would break backwards compatibility in terms of APIs, that do some changes now so you can be included in 2.0 and you're not forcing an MP major bump after the fact.
Well, right. So I think of that then whether or not we would want to release a minimum requirements change on the umbrella now would depend a lot on if the subspecs are intending for there to be breaking changes outside of the minimum Java EU version.
Right.
Like they themselves are going to break their own APIs, right?
Yeah.
And metrics is definitely intending to break their own API, and fault tolerance is definitely intending to use it. So that would have to factor into our decision making. And the question would be, probably put some heat on them. Okay, guys and gals, how much time do you need? Could you get this done before a deadline, which is like reasonable? And we would want this locked down so there could be implementations in the market by, I can't even say the word Java 1 anymore, Code 1. But anyway, that would probably be a market-driven deadline we would want. And if they can get their stuff in line by Code 1, which that is not motivating to me, doesn't have the same weight.
Nope.
I'm not so sure I want to burn the midnight oil for Code 1.
So then use Jakarta 1.
Well, that's a long way away. So
EclipseCon Europe.
Yeah. No, we're losing our timing or our milestone. Like, it was a universally agreed milestone for the whole Java industry. But anyway, totally different.
My concern with the approach, and I know plans can change, but we as a team, as a group, we were trying to get this MicroProfile 2.0 out. Very simple. A lot of people agreed with it, to just update the Java EE8 specs and then move forward. Now, of course, that's what generated a lot of this conversation.
Sure.
But from the way that we're talking now, then it's like, okay, now we got to raise the window and say, hey, anyone going to do a breaking change? And who knows how long that's going to be before we can come out and say that we support Java EE8.
Well,
I'm concerned about that.
I hear the concern as well. And what that would mean is that we would basically be in the position, and I'm okay with this, that we would release a 2.0 and the subspecs would have the stake in the sand. Here's what you can use to be included in 2.0. If you go beyond this and you break your own self, we may not include you. Can you possibly create a version of you that could live in the 2.0 world and delay or push the breaking changes you're planning to a different version?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I mean, force the conversation.
Force the conversation. Here's our deadline. Here's where we want to get. Here we want to all be together.
Why are we giving so much freedom for the sub-projects to go off on their own way? I mean,
we so here's the thing. I don't think we did give them freedom, because if we had been giving them freedom, many of them would have been digging into Java EE8 functionality a long time ago. And I think that's actually biting us, because now we're not ready from that perspective. Now we're in a position where we're kind of the cart's leading the horse a bit with the umbrella specification, moving to a Java EE8 at minimum requirement when there aren't really any subspecs driving any value in Java EE8.
Yeah, except that we would have the definition to allow them to use it for the case of JSON-B.
Right, and so the real value of the Java EE7 to Java EE8 change would be not MicroProfile 2.0 specifically, but 2.1 and 2.2 and 2.3, and it would just ideally become more valuable release chain as it matured, provided one of the subspecs didn't shoot the whole thing down and make a breaking change in themselves, in which we got to jump immediately to 3.
Yep.
Should we want to include them?
So I did highlight from our last discussion that the subspecs do have some level of freedom, right? They can go, they can move forward and make breaking changes, but it just doesn't mean they're going to be picked up by the umbrella spec. So I just thought I'd point it out.
Yeah. What I think then is that we probably just need to get, because what we're discussing is a communication and a time thing, and there's not much time if we do want to just make the 2.0 release, right? In the future, though, we would want to communicate to the subspecifications, don't be shackled by the MicroProfile version, the umbrella version, because that will always mean we're stuck in a situation where we have to release a major version first in order to get you to even think about using those features. You need to tell us what version you want to use, and we need to have this discussion early so all the subspecifications can agree. We need to be driving agreement at that level, and then otherwise if it literally does come down to subspecifications are not using Java EE8 or not using major language changes because the umbrella is not there, then the umbrella is always going to be forced to lead the breaking change. And that just makes it like a really weird scenario where we're always announcing a major version while there's actually nothing in there that's using that major version. And it's going to be a hollow press release.
So we need to, but that's because you're trying to follow the semantic versioning rules, right? I mean, what's stopping us from having a release with just new features?
I don't really see this as being following semantic versioning. This is defining how we're going to do versioning. I mean, a lot of the cases where we talk about this is a breaking change, that's a breaking change, they're not actually breaking changes. They're conditions where we'd bump the major version. And sometimes it'll be because there's a breaking change, and sometimes it won't be.
Let's see.
Right. I think we need to get ourselves in a situation where we're communicating with the subspecifications. You should be thinking about all of the big things that you want to do and try and get them ready by X date or whatever, because we will want to do a major version at some point like 6 months in the future. So if you come up with a really major idea 2 months before the deadline, that's not necessarily helpful. We will leave you behind because we're not going to be Java EE and let one specification push the whole thing out. But, that would just be not helpful. And, we kind of want them to bundle up all these changes at once and not sit on any particular one.
Hey guys, I apologize here, but I'm gonna have to drop off soon.
Yeah, we're
I think we're winding down here.
Yeah. And I'm recording, so
guys, I have to say I went from this call to the next one, just got done, and it's like I'm not joining. I'm like I can't do it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like you guys are hardcore.
So can we make some decisions there? So do we want to go ahead with the 2.0 release based upon Java EE8 because that's the situation we're currently in and the subspecifications have not moved ahead because the MicroProfile umbrella has not moved ahead, but then after this point we fix the scenario so it's the subspecs leading the umbrella rather than the other way around? Or do we want to just wait?
I like that, and I know we don't have representation from all the teams on here, but I think Pyara, and I know, from talking with Mark Little, that he would like it as well, that we continue with the MP20 content.
I would like to as well, so I'll add my vote.
All right. I'm to continue.
+1.
I'm a +1 to continue with the tail end of that statement being we need to train our subspecs to not be leadered by us, to be the ones leading.
On the walk. Yeah. Me too, +1. Let's on the walk. Guys, like, end that call. Too long.
Well, we don't need another call. Now, that's the advantage of having hung out a little bit longer. We don't need more call.
We have a
this
couple
is
of.
on the list.
I don't know if we have all the umbrella spec rules defined. Like we have a couple here. I don't know if we've fully discussed those or not, but anyway, I just want to make.
We've probably got enough to start using it and seeing where the rough edges are as we go along.
MicroProfile 2.0 MP leads subspecs.
So, from my pragmatic perspective, if we do end up with a MicroProfile 3.0 just 6 months after the 2.0, I would be okay with it, provided we made the shift from being umbrella-led to subspec-led, because then we would be fairly comfortable that after 3.0, it would be happening in the right way.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
After establishing all these rules.
Right.
Do these two bullets, oops, actually, you know what? I'm going to screen share again. Where'd it go here? Do these two
I was wondering what
statements...
happened to the screen share.
Well, I thought we were winding down, but... So that was my hint.
No,
do these two bullets...
I hit the wrong key or something.
No, that was me. Do these two bullets capture what we just kind of agreed to? The move to MicroProfile 2.0, MP lead subspecs. I should say 4.2.0 or something like that. In the future, subspecs should lead MP umbrella releases. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
So David, with the 6 months that you were talking about, the 3.0, so if Matrix 2.0 is ready after, what is it, May 15th or 18th, that the 2.0 is penciled in, then Matrix 2.0 has to wait until, what is it, Christmas, and fault tolerance also has to wait for Christmas to be included.
I think 6 months was just David pulling out a date. It wasn't like we couldn't have a 3.0 for 6 months.
It was a made up number.
Okay.
I think it's like a month after 2.0 came out of MicroProfile, if metrics and fault tolerance were all bumping to 2, we'd have to consider making the next MicroProfile umbrella a 3.0.
But before we did that, we would go to the other subspecs and say, if you're ever thinking, ever in your whole life, to put metrics into your specification,
do it.
Can you do us in favor of doing it now?
Yeah.
Yep. Or anyone in favor of dropping metrics for MicroProfile? No, I'm kidding.
I guess, John, in terms
that visibility, we don't need to tell people what's going on. Look at the law.
John, in terms of those two lines, I'm wondering whether it needs to be changed to say that, like, it's around driving the dependent specifications rather than the actual subspecs. So, like, for MicroProfile 2, the umbrella is driving the dependent Java EE versions, but for the future, it should be the subspecs driving that.
Well, I think so.
Yeah, we need to reword these.
Oh yeah, I was trying to listen and write at the same time.
We need to somehow encourage the subspecs to make sure that they are compatible with each other at all times, as feasible as possible.
I think we can do that by stating it with the umbrella, because all the subspecs will want to be part of an umbrella release at some point.
Yeah, that was Heiko's point.
Or the carrot, right? That's the carrot.
And also I think it's it gives us the opportunity to be slightly more flexible and slightly less monolithic in approach if some specs do it faster than others. It's more kind of incremental, more agile.
Right.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I think the essence of those two bullets is that at this moment, MicroProfile 2.0 umbrella is going to be leading a breaking change, which we hope is not the case going forward.
So
that we hope that
So we'll have to, firm up all of these rules, get them out. I don't know if we want to do it on the wiki or whatever, but try to be consistent with all of our wording here.
Can the minutes be sent internally or?
Well, there's a huge minute, so they're going to go straight out.
Yeah. So, but before we move it to wiki, allow us a day, 24 hours to review.
Wikis are editable, so we could just stuff it right.
I don't
right
believe I don't believe that we will go back and adjust the stuff after we put it in the wiki. We're not the kind of people to be so disciplined because we're so busy. So I believe do the best you can once at first time and then solve it later. Procrastination is core and we're so freaking busy. So let's do it once and let's do it right. That would be my feedback.
Yeah, well, my feedback would be the opposite. We should put in the
This is why you and I are together.
Hold on. We should put in the wiki now. That way we haven't procrastinated, and if we want to update it there, we can. And if we don't end up coming back and updating it, at least it's still written down, not in meeting minutes that are going to be lost.
I'm trying to parse this, Ken. In the future, subspecs drive and push for dependent version and breaking changes. That's not.
I think the statement is in the future, the umbrella spec a major version change in the umbrella spec should be forced by the subspecs.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
I would say maybe we could simply say in the future, subspecs should drive minimum version decisions.
Minimum versions of what?
Anything. We need wording that lets them know they shouldn't be waiting, right? They should be driving their own minimum requirements. That's maybe the best way to say it. Sub-specifications should be driving their own minimum requirements.
Right, but how does that then impact or influence the umbrella spec?
Because we have that communication and planning leading up to a release to say, okay, what is each subspec using?
Okay, now I got it. Yeah.
And that we should add another bullet on there that says, if there is an intent to change minimum requirements, this should be communicated to the umbrella spec as soon as possible.
I like that.
We almost need like a PM call just for the dedicated to tracking the progress of the.
I don't want any more calls, but
I think we can use the existing call. There's a call already about this on a regular basis. We could just use that call.
The MP Hangout, you mean?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
1 hour. Huh?
The regular Hangout call is fine, and the you wouldn't be on it comment. Don't get me started. I don't like the concept of lead where it excludes people. So.
Well, I mean, I'm envisioning the sub-project leads will be, attending those for sure.
Still, that doesn't make it any better. The whole decision of who's going to lead the project, I don't consider myself to not be part of the leadership of the project. So we'll just leave it at that.
And I will +1, a lazy +1. This entitlement that I am seeing.
No. Let's just focus on what's at hand.
No, I am seeing entitlement with the word lead thrown out to.
I don't want
carelessly on MicroProfile and how the older, smaller guys or the attendees are feeling. We need to be.
I don't want to raise that topic now.
No, of course not. But I'm saying leads.
Let's get this stuff down.
Is this call being recorded? It's too long.
It's not shorter if we talk about how long it is.
Wow.
Okay.
Guys, you know.
Hello?
Yeah, I'm just saving us all time.
Yeah.
I like the way that's written. So if there's intent to change subspec minimum requirements, well, I would say if the subspec has intent to change its minimum requirements, right? Put the subspec as the Yeah, has intent to change minimum requirements. The umbrella spec should be notified ASAP. I like that. That's fine.
This is, by the way, in the notes section, not necessarily in the actual rules and regulations section.
Yeah, that's okay at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, we still have to formally document this stuff. So
are we going to try and get this written up on the wiki as after this call? Is that the suggestion?
That makes sense to me. What does everybody else think?
I agree. I can't volunteer to do that.
I have a spare hour after this, so I can try and write it up, but it's almost certainly not going to match what everyone thinks because I've only been involved in an hour of,
Well, can we copy paste this right into the wiki at least so it's not lost in a Google Doc?
I mean, that could be a starting point.
Starting point, yeah.
Just refer back to this because this is a running total of all of our minutes. So, the wiki, we could at least point back to this, and then we're going to reword the wiki so that we can say, wait a minute, Alistair, where'd you come up with that one? But Alistair, if you want to volunteer, I would say please do.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll not say finish my sentence because it's like red rag to a bull.
Hey guys, I got to drop.
Yeah, we're 2 minutes over the second hour, so
we're an hour, 2 minutes over.
The third hour. So. All right.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, thank you. Bye.